The air in the courtroom was thick, not with the scent of justice, but with the suffocating aroma of expensive cologne and the cold, metallic tang of absolute power. Julian Sterling sat at the mahogany defense table, his presence commanding the room as if he already owned the verdict. He adjusted the sleeves of his charcoal gray Tom Ford suit, the light catching the sapphire face of his $100,000 Patek Philippe. A smirk, thin and razor-sharp, played on his lips. Beside him, his lead counsel, Marcus Vane, a man known as the Eraser because he made inconvenient people and legal obstacles disappear, was casually scrolling through a tablet, looking bored. To them, this wasn't a trial. It was a chore. A minor nuisance before Julian could officially merge his tech empire with the Beaumont conglomerate and marry his new obsession, Elena, who was currently waiting for him at a five-star brunch spot 2 blocks away. Across the aisle, the contrast was devastating. Elena's predecessor, Clara Sterling, sat in a chair that seemed too big for her small, trembling frame. She wore a simple navy blue dress, off the rack and slightly worn at the seams. Her hair was pulled back into a tight, practical bun, but stray strands framed a face that looked pale and exhausted. She looked exactly like what Julian had told the world she was. A small-town girl from the Midwest who had hit the lottery by marrying him and was now desperately trying to claw onto a life she never deserved. Next to her sat Leo, a public defender with a stutter and a briefcase that looked like it was held together by hope and duct tape. "Look at her, Marcus," Julian whispered, loud enough for Clara to hear. "She's shaking. I almost feel bad. It's like watching a stray cat realize the back door is finally locked." Marcus Vane didn't even look up. "She should have taken the $3,000 a month settlement, Julian. Now, she'll leave with the clothes on her back and a bill for our legal fees. It's not just a divorce. It's an eviction from the upper class." The judge, a stern man named Honorable Silas Thorne, entered the room. The bailiff called the court to order, and the heavy doors groaned shut. Judge Thorne peered over his spectacles at Clara. He had presided over hundreds of high-profile divorces, and his eyes held the weary cynicism of a man who believed every plain wife was just a gold digger who had run out of luck. "We are here in the matter of Sterling versus Sterling," the judge droned. "Mr. Vane, as the petitioner, you may open." Marcus Vane stood up, buttoning his jacket with a slow, deliberate grace. He didn't speak to the judge. He spoke to the gallery, where several high society reporters sat, pens poised. "Your Honor," Vane began, his voice a smooth, theatrical baritone. "This is a tragic case of ambition exceeding ability. My client, Julian Sterling, a visionary who built Sterling Nexus from a garage project into a multi-billion-dollar global infrastructure, is a man of immense generosity. He took Clara Jones, a waitress with no higher education and no social standing, and gave her the world. He gave her mansions, staff, and a name that carries weight in every capital city. And how was he repaid?" Vane paused, letting the silence hang until it felt heavy. "He was repaid with incompetence, with a refusal to adapt to the circles he moved in. Mrs. Sterling wasn't just a stay-at-home wife. She was a ghost in her own home. She contributed nothing to the growth of the company. In fact, her social blunders and lack of sophistication have cost my client valuable partnerships. We have affidavits from household staff detailing her laziness. We have financial records showing she spent thousands on charities in her hometown without authorization. We aren't just asking for a dissolution of marriage, Your Honor. We are asking for an annulment based on fraud. We believe she entered this marriage with the sole intent of parasitic extraction." Clara flinched as if she had been struck. She looked at Julian, her eyes searching for a shred of the man who had once promised to protect her. But Julian didn't look back. He was busy checking a notification on his phone, a small laugh escaping his throat as he replied to a text. "Your Honor," Leo, the public defender, stood up. His voice was thin and lacked the practiced resonance of Vane. "And Mrs. Sterling, Clara. She was there for every late night. She supported Mr. Sterling when the company was nearly bankrupt 4 years ago." "She? Evidence, Mr. O'Malley?" Vane interrupted, not even turning around. Do you have a signed contract? Do you have a board-approved consultant agreement? Or do you just have the sentimental ramblings of a woman who realizes the free ride is over? I have her word, Leo stammered. The gallery erupted in muffled laughter. Judge Thorne banged his gavel. Order, Mr. O'Malley. Her word doesn't pay the light bill, and it certainly doesn't entitle her to 40% of a tech conglomerate. Do you have anything else? Clara felt the walls closing in. For 3 years, Julian had slowly isolated her. He had told her that her family was difficult and low-class, so she had stopped calling them to save him the embarrassment. He had taken over her bank accounts, saying he would manage their future. He had made her believe she was nothing without him. And now, in this cold room, he was finishing the job. Julian leaned across the aisle, his voice a low, venomous hiss. Give it up, Clara. Sign the waiver. I might let you keep your grandmother's ring if you leave quietly. If you don't, I'll make sure you can't even get a job cleaning toilets in this city. I own the banks, I own the courts, and I own you. Clara looked at the clock. 10:30 a.m. A strange stillness came over her. The shaking stopped. She reached into her small, cheap purse and pulled out a sleek, black device, a high-end encrypted pager. It hummed once against her palm. A single blue light flashed. Is there something funny, Mrs. Sterling? Judge Thorne asked, noting the slight tilt of her head. Clara stood up. She didn't wait for Leo to speak for her. She ignored Julian's smirk. Your Honor, Clara said. Her voice wasn't thin anymore. It was clear, vibrating with a frequency that made the court reporter look up. Mr. Vane is right about one thing. This marriage was built on a lie. But it wasn't my lie. It was Julian's belief that he was the only power in this room. Sit down, Clara, Julian growled, his face turning a shade of red. You're making a fool of yourself. I told you I was from a small town in the north, Julian, Clara continued, her eyes fixed on him, as cold and unyielding as the winter he had once claimed to save her from. And you assumed that meant I was a nobody. You assumed that because I enjoyed the quiet, I had nothing to say. You wanted a starter wife you could mold and then discard. But you forgot to check the roots of the tree you were trying to cut down. Your Honor, this is a waste of time, Vane shouted. She's having a breakdown. No, Clara said, looking at the heavy double doors at the back of the room. My family is just notoriously bad with New York traffic. But they've finally arrived. Suddenly, the ground seemed to vibrate. It wasn't an earthquake. It was a rhythmic, heavy thudding from the hallway, the sound of dozens of feet moving in perfect unison. The courtroom doors didn't just open. They were thrown wide with a force that made the hinges scream. 6 men in tailored black tactical suits, with earpieces and the unmistakable posture of Tier 1 military veterans, entered first. They didn't look at the judge. They didn't look at the police. They moved with a silent, terrifying efficiency, flanking the perimeter of the room. The gallery went silent. Julian's smirk vanished. Then, through the human corridor, walked a man who looked like he had been carved from the very mahogany of the judge's bench. He was in his late 60s, with hair like silver wire and a suit that didn't just look expensive. It looked like it was woven from old, untouchable money. He carried a cane with a wolf's head made of solid platinum. Behind him came a woman in a white power suit, her features a sharper, more lethal version of Clara's. And behind them, a phalanx of 15 lawyers, each carrying a leather briefcase embossed with a gold seal Julian recognized instantly. The seal of the Vancroft estate. The Vancrofts weren't billionaires. They were the people who invented the billionaires. They were the old guard that owned the land the banks were built on. The silver-haired man stopped at the center of the aisle. He didn't look at Julian. He looked at Clara. Forgive the delay, Charlotte, the man said, his voice a deep, resonant rumble that filled every corner of the room. The private jet had a headwind, and your brother insisted on bringing the full security detail. Clara, no, Charlotte Vancroft stepped out from behind the defense table. It's all right, father, she said, her voice dripping with a newfound, glacial authority. You're just in time for the part where they try to take my grandmother's ring. The silence in the Manhattan Superior Court was so thick it felt physical. Judge Thorne, a man who had stared down mob bosses and Wall Street titans, looked visibly shaken. He knew the man standing in his aisle. Everyone who understood the true hierarchy of the United States knew William Vancroft. The Vancrofts didn't do press releases. They didn't appear on Forbes lists, because they considered such lists gawky and loud. They were the silent architects of the American rail, steel, and energy grids. Julian Sterling, however, looked as though he had seen a ghost. His hand, which had been so steady while mocking Clara moments ago, was now trembling. He looked at the silver-haired patriarch, then at the woman in the white suit, and finally at Clara. Charlotte. Julian choked out, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. What is this? Who are these people? The woman in the white suit, Charlotte's older sister, Victoria Vancroft Sterling, no relation to Julian's family, stepped forward. She didn't walk. She glided, her heels clicking against the marble with the precision of a ticking clock. She signaled to the phalanx of 15 lawyers behind her. In perfect synchronization, they moved to the defense table, gently nudging the bewildered public defender, Leo, aside. They replaced his worn folders with stacks of high-grade, gold-embossed legal documents. I am Victoria Vancroft, Senior Managing Partner of Vancroft and Associates, she announced. Her voice was like a velvet-covered blade. We are here to enter our appearance as lead counsel for the defendant, Charlotte Vancroft. My apologies to the court, but the previous counsel was a temporary measure while Charlotte conducted her little social experiment. Social experiment? Marcus Vane stammered, his face pale. Your Honor, I object. This is a circus. My client is the CEO of Sterling Nexus. We are in the middle of a... You are in the middle of a mistake, Mr. Vane? Victoria interrupted, her eyes locking onto him with predatory focus. A $5 billion mistake. William Vancroft tapped his platinum-topped cane on the floor once. The sound echoed like a gunshot. He walked to the front row of the gallery, and the reporters scrambled out of their seats as if they were on fire, offering him the entire row. He sat down, his cold blue eyes fixed on Julian. He didn't look angry. He looked like a scientist observing a particularly dull insect. Charlotte, William said, his voice a low rumble. You told me you wanted to see if a man could love the woman and not the ledger. You spent 3 years in this apartment, living on a budget. Are you satisfied with the results? Charlotte stood tall, her shoulders squared, the navy blue dress no longer looking like a sign of poverty, but like a disguise she was finally peeling off. I have my answer, Father. He didn't just fail the test. He tried to burn the classroom down on his way out. Very well, William nodded. Victoria, proceed. The jet is fueled for our return to Rhode Island, and I find the air in this room stagnant. Victoria turned to the judge. Your Honor, we move to immediately dismiss the plaintiff's motion for annulment based on fraud. If there is any fraud in this room, it belongs to Mr. Julian Sterling. Furthermore, we are filing a countersuit for emotional distress, breach of fiduciary duty, and corporate theft. Corporate theft? Julian shouted, finally regaining his voice, though it was an octave higher than usual. I built Sterling Nexus. I own it. She was just a housewife. Charlotte walked toward the middle of the room. She stood inches away from Julian. The powerless wife was gone. In her place was a woman who had been raised in ballrooms and boardrooms since she was 5 years old. You didn't build it alone, Julian, Charlotte said softly. Do you remember the angel investor who saved you 4 years ago? The Venexus Fund that injected $50 million when your servers crashed and your venture capitalists abandoned you. Julian froze. His eyes went wide. That was a private equity firm from Switzerland. It was a shell company owned by my trust fund, Charlotte revealed. A small, cold smile touched her lips. I didn't want my husband to fail, Julian. I loved you. I thought if I saved your dream, you'd finally have time for us. I authorized that investment. But I didn't just give you money. I bought the debt. Venexus doesn't just own 40% of your shares. Because of the emergency clause you signed while you were panicking. The one you didn't bother to read because you were too busy celebrating. Vancroft has the right to seize the remaining 60% in the event of moral turpitude or criminal negligence. Victoria slid a document across the table toward Marcus Vane. Like, for instance, using company funds to pay for a penthouse for a mistress named Elena. Or embezzling $3 million into an offshore account in the Caymans to avoid the very divorce you just triggered. Marcus Vane looked at the document and visibly recoiled. He looked at Julian. Julian? Is this true? Julian couldn't speak. The walls of his empire weren't just cracking. They were evaporating. You called me a starter wife, Julian, Charlotte said, her voice echoing in the absolute silence of the courtroom. You told me I was dead weight. You told the court I was a parasite. But the truth is, I was the only thing keeping you afloat. I was the oxygen in your lungs, and you were too arrogant to realize you were breathing for two. Judge Thorne cleared his throat, his voice unusually polite. Ms. Vancroft, the court is somewhat overwhelmed by this new information. We will need a recess to verify. Verify whatever you wish, Your Honor, Victoria said, already packing her gold-rimmed glasses. But while you verify, my team has already initiated a freeze on all Sterling Nexus assets. Mr. Sterling's credit cards will be declined by the time he reaches the lobby. His access to the Sterling building has been revoked. And as for the marital residence, the penthouse on Fifth Avenue, it's owned by a Vancroft holding company. Mr. Sterling has exactly 1 hour to remove his personal belongings before the locks are changed. Julian slumped into his chair. He looked at Marcus Vane, but his Butcher of Broadway lawyer was already backing away, literally moving his chair a few inches further from Julian as if the bankruptcy was contagious. You can't do this, Julian whispered, his eyes searching for Charlotte's. Clara, please. I was stressed. The merger. I didn't mean those things. We can talk about this. We don't need lawyers. Charlotte looked at him, and for a fleeting second, Julian saw a flash of the woman who had made him coffee every morning. But then, the steel of the Vancroft lineage slammed shut in her eyes. My name is Charlotte, she said. And as you said earlier, Julian, this is about optics. And right now, the optics for you look like a complete and total blackout. She turned her back on him. She didn't look at the cameras. She didn't look at the reporters. She walked to her father, who stood up and offered her his arm. Shall we, Charlotte? William asked. The brass and glass lobby of the Manhattan Superior Court was swarming. The news of the Vancroft reveal had traveled through the building like a wildfire in a dry forest. By the time Julian Sterling stepped out of the courtroom, his ears were ringing. He felt as though the floor beneath his bespoke Italian shoes was made of thin ice, and he could hear the cracks spreading. Marcus Vane was walking 3 paces ahead of him, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and urgent. He wasn't talking to Julian anymore. He was talking to his partners, likely trying to distance his firm from the impending nuclear fallout. Marcus, Julian hissed, catching up to him near the revolving doors. What just happened in there? They can't just freeze my accounts. That's illegal. I'm the CEO of Sterling Nexus. Marcus stopped and looked at Julian. The professional deference was gone. In its place was the cold, clinical look of a man looking at a sinking ship. Julian, listen to me very carefully. You didn't just marry a girl from Wyoming. You married the only family in America that the IRS is afraid of. If Victoria Vancroft says your accounts are frozen, they aren't just frozen. They're buried under 6 feet of legal permafrost. And that document she showed? The embezzlement? If those numbers are real, you aren't looking at a divorce settlement anymore. You're looking at an indictment. It was a temporary transfer. Julian snapped, his voice cracking. I was going to put it back after the merger. Tell it to the feds, Marcus said, signaling for his car. And don't call my personal line again. My firm is withdrawing as your counsel. Conflict of interest. It turns out the Vancroft estate retains our senior partners for their maritime insurance. I'm done, Julian. Good luck. Julian stood on the sidewalk, watched by a dozen camera lenses. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He needed to call Elena. He needed to hear her voice, to be reminded that he was still the man in charge. The call went to voicemail 3 times. He tried to hail his private driver, but the black Mercedes that usually waited for him was nowhere to be seen. He pulled up his ride-sharing app ** account suspended. Please contact billing. **. A cold knot of panic tightened in his chest. He pulled out his wallet and took out his black American Express card. He walked into a high-end cafe next to the court, his throat parched. "Double espresso," he barked at the barista. The young man behind the counter swiped the card. A sharp, rhythmic beeping followed. "Declined." "Try it again," Julian ordered, his face flushing. "It's a black card. It doesn't have a limit." "Sir, it's being declined by the issuer. Do you have another form of payment?" Julian looked in his wallet. He had 2 $20 bills and a 5. He, the titan of Sterling Nexus, was standing in a cafe, counting change like a college student. He threw a 20 on the counter and walked out without his coffee. He hailed a yellow cab, a humiliation he hadn't endured in a decade. The Sterling Heights penthouse. 5th Avenue fast. The drive uptown felt like an eternity. Julian stared out the window at the skyline he thought he had conquered. He realized with a jolt of horror that he didn't even know his wife's real birthday. He had never visited her hometown. He had spent 3 years living with a Vancroft, and he had treated her like a servant. When the cab pulled up to the gilded awning of his apartment building, Julian didn't wait for the door. He sprinted toward the lobby. "Mr. Sterling," the doorman said. He didn't open the door. He stood in front of it, his posture stiff. "Move, George," Julian snapped. "I'm in a hurry." "I'm sorry, sir," George said, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. "I have strict instructions. Your access to the building has been terminated by the property management. The Vancroft Holding Group took ownership of the deed 45 minutes ago." "I live here," Julian screamed. "My clothes are in there. My safe is in there." "There are 2 suitcases waiting for you in the service entrance, sir," George said, pointing toward the alley. "Everything else is being inventoried by a legal team. I'm told if you attempt to enter the premises, I'm to call the NYPD for trespassing." Julian felt the world spinning. He looked around. Passers-by were staring. A tourist was filming him on an iPhone. He was Julian Sterling, the man who was supposed to be the next Elon Musk, and he was being barred from his own home by a man he used to tip $50 at Christmas. He walked to the service entrance. 2 beat-up suitcases, the ones Clara had used when she first moved in, were sitting on the concrete. Attached to the handle of one was a small, cream-colored envelope. He ripped it open. It was a note from Victoria Vancroft. * Julian. "Charlotte always said you were a man of vision. I hope you have the vision to see what comes next. The forensic auditors are currently at the Sterling Nexus headquarters. We found the offshore accounts. We found the Elena files. And we found the contracts you forged to bypass the board. By 5 p.m., the SEC will be issuing a trading halt on your stock. By tomorrow morning, the board will vote for your removal for cause. You wanted her to have nothing. Now you get to see what that feels like. *. Julian kicked the suitcase, a guttural scream escaping his throat. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Elena. * Julian, I saw the news. A Vancroft? Are you insane? My father says if I'm seen with you, he'll cut off my trust fund. Don't come to the hotel. I've already checked out. Don't call me. This is embarrassing. *. Julian sat down on his suitcase in the alleyway. The smell of trash and expensive leather mingled in the air. He realized then that Charlotte, hadn't just left him. She had erased him. She had taken the ladder he used to climb to the top and turned it into a noose. But Julian was a shark. Or at least he believed he was. He stood up, wiping the sweat from his forehead. He still had the company. He still had his brain. They couldn't take his intelligence. He would go to the office. He would rally the board. He would tell them it was a hostile takeover by an old money family trying to stifle innovation. The public loved an underdog. He would play the victim. He hailed another cab. Sterling Nexus headquarters. Now. But as the cab pulled away, Julian didn't notice the two black SUVs following at a discreet distance. He didn't notice the federal agents waiting in the lobby of his office building. Charlotte Vancroft had spent 3 years watching him. She knew his every move, his every lie, and his every weakness. And she wasn't just divorcing him. She was performing a surgical extraction of everything he valued. As the cab sped toward Wall Street, Julian looked at his reflection in the window. He looked older, grayer. The shark was out of the water, and the tide was going out faster than he could swim. The Sterling Nexus headquarters was a 90-story monolith of glass and steel, a monument to Julian's ego. Usually, when he walked through those revolving doors, the lobby fell silent in a show of terrified respect. But today, the silence was different. It was the silence of a morgue. Julian ignored the whispers as he marched toward the executive elevators. He pressed his thumb against the biometric scanner. Access denied. He tried again, slamming his thumb down. User not recognized. Mr. Sterling? Julian spun around. Standing there was the head of corporate security, a man Julian had personally hired. He was accompanied by 2 men in suits who had Federal Bureau written all over their stony expressions. Move aside, Henderson, Julian barked. The system is glitching. Get me up to the boardroom. I can't do that, Julian, Henderson said, and the use of his first name felt like a physical slap. The board of directors held an emergency session 20 minutes ago. You've been removed as CEO and chairman, effective immediately. These gentlemen are from the SEC's Enforcement Division. They're here to supervise the seizure of your hard drives. You can't remove me. I own 40%. Julian screamed, his voice echoing off the marble walls. Actually, a familiar, icy voice rang out from the mezzanine. Charlotte Vancroft descended the grand staircase. She had changed out of the navy dress. She now wore a tailored charcoal suit that looked like it belonged to a general. Beside her was William Vancroft and Victoria. Actually, Julian, Charlotte said, stopping a few feet from him. You don't remember the Venexus debt? The one you triggered the moment you filed a fraudulent divorce claim? We foreclosed on your collateral 10 minutes ago. Your shares no longer belong to you. They belong to the Vancroft estate. Julian felt his knees buckle. You planned this. From the day we met, you were planning to steal my company. Charlotte walked closer, her eyes boring into his. I didn't plan for you to be a criminal, Julian. I didn't plan for you to be a cheat. I gave you 3 years to be a man of integrity. I gave you every resource, every ounce of my support, and $50 million of my own money to help you build your dream. All I asked for was a partner. You're the one who turned a marriage into a transaction. I'm just the one who's closing the account. Charlotte, please, Julian whispered, the desperation finally breaking through. We can fix this. I'll step down quietly. Just don't let them take everything. It's not up to me anymore, Charlotte said, stepping back to let the federal agents pass. It's up to the forensic trail you left behind. Oh, and Julian? Elena called. She's currently giving a statement to the authorities about the gifts. You bought her with company money in exchange for her silence on the merger fraud. It seems she values her freedom more than her soulmate. The federal agents stepped forward. Julian Sterling, you're under investigation for securities fraud and embezzlement. You need to come with us for questioning. As the agents led a shattered, sobbing Julian toward the exit, the cameras of the world's financial press caught every second. The Titan had fallen, not to a rival company, but to the powerless woman he thought he had broken. 6 months later, the Vancroft estate in Rhode Island was a place of eternal spring. Charlotte sat on the terrace, a cup of tea in her hand, looking out over the Atlantic. The ring, the simple gold band Julian had tried to take, was gone, replaced by a Vancroft signet ring that carried the weight of 4 centuries. Victoria walked onto the terrace, dropping a copy of the Wall Street Journal on the table. The headline read, Sterling sentenced. EX tech tycoon T.O. served 10 years for fraud. He tried to appeal, Victoria said, sitting down. The judge laughed him out of the room. He's currently sharing a cell in a federal facility in upstate New York. I hear he's found a new job in the prison laundry. It doesn't pay as well as Sterling Nexus, but the optics are very consistent. Charlotte didn't smile. There was no joy in Julian's ruin, only a profound sense of order restored. And the company? Sterling Vancroft is up 20% this quarter, Victoria replied. The markets love stability, and they love a CEO who actually knows how to read a balance sheet. Charlotte looked at the horizon. She had spent 3 years pretending to be small so a man could feel big. She had learned that true power isn't about the noise you make or the suits you wear. It's about the roots you have and the truth you hold. You know, Victoria, Charlotte said softly. He told me once that I was a starter wife, that he had outgrown me. Victoria squeezed her sister's hand. He was right about one thing. He did outgrow his environment. He just didn't realize he was a goldfish trying to swallow an ocean. Charlotte stood up, the wind catching her hair. She looked stronger, brighter, and infinitely more dangerous than the woman in the courtroom. Let's get back to work, Charlotte said. We have an empire to run. Julian Sterling thought he was playing a game with a powerless woman. He thought wealth was a shield that could protect him from the consequences of his own cruelty. But he forgot the oldest rule in the book. Never mistake silence for weakness. Charlotte Vancroft didn't just win her divorce. She reclaimed her life and proved that a dynasty is built on more than just money. It's built on the strength of the people you underestimate. What did you think of Charlotte's revenge? Was 10 years in prison enough for Julian, or did he deserve to lose even more? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of supreme justice, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss another tale of the quiet ones waking up. Thanks for watching.